Welcome everyone, Christine here with the discussion about the starting positions, the strategy and dilemmas that the Chaos Dwarves are going to have in their campaigns. In this video I want to talk about Zhatan the Black in both Immortal Empires and Realms of Chaos. We have both of his starting positions, we saw his Realms of Chaos starting position in his campaign preview, and we have a map showing where he's starting. He starts with the Valerie and the Granite Spikes in Immortal Empires. Now, I'm curious to see if there's going to be any provincial changes over here of any kind of description, because starting with two minor settlements over here in this kind of starting position, I would call this campaign suicide if you don't start at the provincial capital, especially because apparently for the Chaos Dwarves to actually have a provincial capital can cost them a significant number of resources. So there's going to be a lot of problems. Maybe if the Valerie is made the provincial capital over here, and you start with the tower here, as opposed to the Fortress of Eyes being the provincial capital. But I guess we will find out how things are going to go over here, or if we need to capture a provincial capital from start. Whether or not we start with the tower, or we have to make one. If we have to make one, this might actually end up being the hardest Chaos Dwarf campaign, because you do have obvious reasons for this. Now you have Kolic. We don't know how Chaos Dwarves are going to have, how their relationship is going to be with the Warriors of Chaos, but I imagine since they're Chaos factions, they might get along very well. Though, don't let that fool you into believing you're safe from Chaos factions just because you're Chaos. Chaos does fight itself all the time. So one of the problems, of course, is potentially starting with two settlements in two different provinces. Unless they make some changes over here, maybe make an entire province over here with the Granite Spikes, so you start with two settlements, even if you have to capture a provincial capital itself. Now, the obvious issue in this campaign, especially in this campaign, is going to be the green tide that's going to descend from the Saber Mountain on here. If you're playing Astrogoth, you might be able to avoid Grimgor. You have some options. If you're playing Zhatan, you are not going to be able to avoid Grimgor. So buckle up. It's going to be rough. I don't care how many changes they make. Grimgor is still a powerhouse. The reason he's a powerhouse, and I mentioned this in Astrogoth's video, the reason Grimgor is such an issue is the same reason Skaven are such an issue in a campaign, or every Greenskin Legendary Lord is an issue in every campaign. It's because the AI benefits specifically benefit them in the early game. They get much reduced upkeep, growth, income, and that's something the Greenskins, which have very cheap but still very effective units early on in their campaign, can really utilize. So what do you do if you're playing Zhatan the Black in this campaign? Well, if you don't have a provincial capital, you want to get one. But I'm not sure what options would there be. I mean, you could go over here to the east to take the Fortress of Eyes, assuming the Valerie doesn't become the provincial capital, and then march east. That, of course, means ignoring the nuclear weapon that's going to be heading straight for you. So therein lies the problem. But you might be able to defeat Grimgor or keep him in check if you can make an alliance with Kolic pretty quickly in this campaign. So let's assume you're starting here, right? We don't know where he's actually starting, where his army is starting, so that the position of his army is going to dictate a lot of things. If he starts, let's say, here, then one of the things you can do very, very quickly in this campaign, take the settlement, which belongs to Grimgor, and give it to Kolic quickly. I mean quickly because Grimgor wants this settlement, and the way the AI works in the game is that when they want a province, they're kind of primed to take a certain settlement. So Kolic will always take the challenge zone on turn 1, things like that, right? So you want to sell this to Kolic because that's going to help trigger a war between Kolic and Grimgor, and you need that. Oh boy, do you need that. You don't want to get involved in that war necessarily from the start, or you can take a very aggressive route. Spend every bit of coin, resources, everything that you can, build as many units as possible, and aim it squarely at Saber Mountain. It doesn't matter if you're taking this province for yourself. You might even try and hold on to the settlement on your own, depending on how they've decided to do things over here, who you actually start at war with. For all we know, he could start at war with Grimgor, but it doesn't matter who you start at war with. Nothing, and I do mean nothing, else matters in this situation except eliminating Grimgor as quickly as possible. I mean, when I'm dealing with the campaign and I know I'm going to be dealing with Grimgor, I have to plan my entire campaign around the inevitable fact that I'm going to have to fight this bastard. If you play as Kolic, your entire early game plan revolves around dealing with Grimgor. That's the situation Zhatan is going to have. It doesn't matter if your settlements get sacked by some minor ogre faction. That minor ogre faction, you can just turn a stack around that you used to defeat Grimgor and annihilate them. But you won't just be able to easily turn an army around to deal with Grimgor when he shows up to take your settlement. So, focus on that. Focus on provoking a war between Kolic and Grimgor if you need help to defeat Grimgor. Or just wage the war yourself one way or another. Now, Kolic doesn't really like Grimgor, so it might be inevitable that the war starts anyway. But you can certainly speed this up by giving the settlement to Kolic, maybe getting some benefits, maybe giving him some other territory as well. One of the ways to get a military alliance, a defensive alliance, especially you're aiming for that, is to give some territory. And if you do get a defensive alliance with Kolic, it might be in your favor to wait a bit, build up your empire somewhere else, like taking the Fortress of Ice, building up over there. Waiting a bit until Grimgor has taken some of this territory, or just adopting a defensive posture, until Grimgor takes this territory, weakens his army, fighting Kolic, and then you swoop in, kill Grimgor, take Saber Mountain. That's the early game situation. We'll see the specifics of it when we actually get the actual campaign in Immortal Empires, but regardless of the situation, you are going to have to deal with Grimgor, one way or another. Or you're going to have to abandon this Granite Spikes. I do imagine they're going to make some changes to this province. If they don't, it's going to be a rough time. And if they do have your 2 starting settlements in 2 different provinces, and I'm not sure if any campaign actually has that kind of starting position. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. So they're likely going to merge these together, possibly. We don't know for certain. And maybe put Iron Storm with the Fortress of Ice over here. I guess we'll see about that. But if they do, if they don't decide to merge them together, just abandon the Granite Spikes. And if you have a tower over here, just play a defensive posture. Or maybe take the settlement here, sell it to Kolic, get the heck out of the Granite Spikes and let Grimgor exhaust himself while you build up to the east. Over here, there's opportunities for territory, though. Of course, going into Cafe presents another issue in the sense that you have to deal with the Great Bastion. But to be quite blunt about it, I think I would rather deal with the Great Bastion than deal with Grimgor. And you might have good relations with Village. And if you can breach the Great Bastion and sell that to Village, that will mean Village's powerful armies can go into Grand Cafe. And the advantage for you, if you hit Grand Cafe early on, Grand Cafe can become powerful later on in the campaign, but early on they're a bit limited, and they do have a major issue over here with Snitch. So if you can hit Cafe quickly, you can possibly take over all of Cafe, though you will have to deal with Xiaoming later on. And it's hard to say how effective the Cast Dwarf armies are going to be against Grand Cafe. What are your alternatives in this particular campaign? Well, you could expand in the Darklands. You do have the capital over here pretty close by, which is going to be controlled by an AI faction. But the problem is the distances in Darklands are pretty vast right now, so unless they change that, and we don't know that they will, it might not be in your best interest. And who are you going to go up in the Darklands? Because if you expand south, yes, you will have the Ashen in the Black Fortress over here to provide some kind of flank support, but having to deal with Tretch and Emmerich, and you can be damn certain if you deal with Tretch, you're going to have to deal with Emmerich, since they're very close by them. They might as well be allies if you're playing the Cast Wars, because if you take out this whole territory, you meet Emmerich, Emmerich probably won't like you, you're going to have to fight him, then you end up in the situation, say hello to Scarbrand. So it's not really a great plan over here. I think the commander of the Black Fortress, he's going to have some real issues in his campaign. I mean, you think Zhatan's campaign situation is hard? At least he has potential. Like, he deals with Grimgor, then he has a bunch of territory he can take. The Black Fortress, that's a completely different situation. I had genuinely hoped that Creative Assembly would not do this, but it seems they're turning Darklands into the Thunderdome. 4 men enter, 1 man leaves, and he sure as heck isn't a dwarf. He's green. He's ugly, he's big and powerful. That's kind of the situation. Certainly is going to be the situation when you're playing Grimgore campaign. So Cathay might be really the best path in expansion. It's got a lot of good territory, and judging based on what we've seen in the campaign previews, the Chaos Dwarfs can take a lot of territorial types. Like in the last one, in Zhatan's own campaign preview, we saw him taking Frozen, we saw him taking Temperate, with no issues whatsoever, and obviously mountainous terrain and wasteland terrain. So going in Cathay and just getting the heck out of this situation might be your best plan. Hell, who knows, maybe Astrogoth will have the courtesy of just throwing himself against Grimgore and dying as well. Maybe that would be great as well over there. Or you can just try and push really, really hard against Grimgore and then go to Cathay. The Mountains of Morn are actually not really that great because they don't necessarily have a lot of provincial capitals they can properly use. We'll see if the Chaos Dwarfs can actually establish proper provincial capitals, though, based on what we've seen in the campaign previews, one of the things to note is that it did seem like the developers were not building towers in every province, and there's certainly enough provincial capitals to actually use in the Mountains of Morn, like Karakazorn, Karak Vrag, and we don't know if they're going to add any minor Chaos Dwarf factions as well in this kind of situation. If they do that, there's some potential there as well. So we'll see, like Mountains of Morn, Cathay, marching down south, eventually linking up with the Black Fortress, dealing with Grease's Gorse, Kugath, Emmerich. Oh yes, this is a fun experience that you're going to have. I mean, Astrogoth at least has the potential of just sweeping into Kislev. If you're playing Zhatan, you're in a rough state of affairs. There's no way around that. And yes, there are changes we don't know for certain, but if anyone's going to tell me that dealing with Grimgore from early on is an easy prospect, it is not. The reason it works for Kolek, let me explain. The reason that it works for Kolek is because he starts with this, right? You can get these to rank 3 very quickly in his campaign. These guys are pretty good. You can get the Regiment Renown, a Hell Cannon. Just understand what Kolek is bringing into the fray to forcefully vassalize Grimgore, because you can do so very, very quickly in your campaign. Just understand, he's bringing a powerful army, a full stack of units even, by the time he's having to deal with Grimgore, because you get that Hell Cannon, you get that Regiment of Renown, you get these Castrolls to rank 3, so you make them armored. That's a pretty damn powerful army to bring against someone. And even then, it's a harsh fight. You probably won't have the luxury of starting with such a powerful army as Zhatan, and you can't count on Kolek doing the fighting for you. If you're hoping the AI will ever win your wars for you, be prepared to be disappointed. So, this is probably the hardest campaign start of the Chaos Dwarves by far. Now, for Realms of Chaos, you will start with the Gates of Zar, which is currently in the Plains of Zar province, though it has been removed from that with the update that they've done. You can see this in a campaign preview pretty early on. So the Gates of Zar is a provincial capital. It also includes Howling Rock and a third settlement that apparently they've decided to add in. Basically, they seem to have moved the settlements around, so I think the Gates of Zar is closer to this particular point on the map. Howling Rock somewhere around here, and the third settlement that they've added will be closer to the pass over on this side. That's the province you start in. We haven't really seen what the changes to the Blasted Wastes have been, nor have we seen what changes are to the Plains of Zar province over here either. But you will start with just this settlement, and you're going to be expanding west, taking settlements along the way. Now, there are several possibilities when it comes to this. You gotta assume as the Chaos Dwarves that a lot of factions hate you. The Greenskins hate you for fairly obvious reasons. The regular Dwarves hate you for obvious reasons. So when it comes to your starting position, it feels like it's a trap in a lot of ways. Because to the south, you probably have more Greenskins and, of course, Stretch Craventail, who is in Crookback Mountain over here. And then you, of course, have Emmerich and the Fortress of Vorag, which is going to be a provincial capital based on what we've seen in Drazov's campaign preview. Don't worry, we'll get to him soon enough. So you do have enemies to the south. You may have some enemies to the north, though Drazov himself may deal with the situation over here. And maybe you should let him. I think diplomacy is actually going to be important in a Chaos Dwarf campaign, because if you think you're dealing with everything on your own, be prepared to be disappointed, I believe. Like, looking just at the Darklands in general, both Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empires, it's very, very exposed. So you need some allies, and a lot of factions hate you. Greenskins hate you, which might, for other cash factions, they might actually be decent allies, but not in your case. I imagine there's going to be a high level of aversion. Skaven, it's always iffy. If you think you can trust the Skaven in the campaign, they can actually make great allies if you can make that alliance work in the first place, if they don't have a strong aversion towards you. But otherwise, it might be a problem. And of course, dwarves do absolutely despise you. So great, you're kind of playing Vlad's campaign actually in Immortal Empires, where he may have to deal with Karakandrin and Zufbar on his own. Well, Zufbar certainly. So what do you do in this campaign? Well, you obviously take your initial province, right? The Gates of Zar. And at that point, you do have a choice. That choice effectively boils down to, do you want to trust Tretch Craventail, or do you want to kill Tretch Craventail? That's essentially what it's gonna boil down to. Like he starts in Crookback Mountain, this element is ruined. Maybe it's ruined again, but if you take it and you then sell it to Tretch and Tretch Craventail, then you could possibly make some kind of deal with him. Take these elements, sell them to them, or you could just decide to wipe him out. Then go for Emmerich, do a clean sweep of this entire situation. Basically take territory that Drazov would probably take on his own. And then once you've done the full circle and you've met Astrogoth and gotten some deals with him, like Astrogoth is obviously always going to take his own province, then go to war with the Skaven. After that point, you might want to advance down here. I would ignore the Silver Pinnacle, or if you're going for the Silver Pinnacle, you don't go all the way here. You don't want to deal with Kislev necessarily in Zhatan's campaign. What I would instead do is take Peak Pass, go with the Red Eye Orcs, and hopefully have some kind of deal in place and try and provoke a war between the Red Eye Greenskins and Astrogoth. Or, since you're going to spend some of your early campaign situation dealing with the situation here, by the point you arrive at the lair here, you might have Karakadrin having wiped out the Red Eye Greenskins here for you, in which case you go deal with him. My recommendation when dealing with Slayers, bring a lot of range units, some cavalry units to distract them, run around, and use your range units to deal with them. If you engage in a prolonged melee fight with Slayers, you'll take significant damage against them. The key is they have low armor, so you kill them with range. Maybe just throw a bunch of laborers as meat shields and just kill them with blunderbusses. Kill everything with blunderbusses anyway. What do you care about a bunch of laborers? Then deal with Zufbar. And I would probably establish a proper tower at Karakadrin, mainly for defensive purposes, believe it or not necessarily for the benefits of the tower. Then take Zufbar, come over here in Oakenhammer, and take Dragonhof. This will create a war between you and Manfred, of course, but Manfred is generally going to push against Ostermark, so his army might be on the northern side, which obviously means Karakadrin is going to be vulnerable. In fact, this is exactly what we saw in the campaign preview for Zhatan, that he had Karakadrin, but he didn't have it as provincial capital, which was a mistake as far as I see it. Like, when you have a territory that's this vulnerable, you try and make it less vulnerable, because there's obviously factions that can come from the north. Kislev, for instance, can come from the north. Ostermark can be an issue. You want to take Drakenhof for the gold mine it has, and you want to secure this territory. My advice when it comes to it, try and, I don't know, have some kind of alliance with Astrogoth. We'll see how relations between them are, where Astrogoth, like, if you can somehow control Astrogoth or manipulate them into going all the way here, this would be to your benefit, because he would then pressure Kislev. One of the ways you could do this is take the Silver Pinnacle, take the settlements here, and sell them to Astrogoth. Because when you sell the settlements to the AI, in order specifically, like you sell the Silver Pinnacle one turn, then this one, second turn, Karakungor, third turn, the AI will constantly move armies to the settlement that's furthest away to defend it. That's their logic. So if you can give Astrogoth, at least Karakungor, he will move an army here, which means he'll be in a position to meet Kislev. He won't like what he sees, and Kislev won't like what they see. So if you can spark a war between Astrogoth and Kislev, that will be to your advantage, because that means you can sweep the south all the way towards here. And that's great because this will give you a strong line of defense against these factions. Be aware of course, the Imperial factions. Scrag is actually a lot more powerful than the Imperial faction, so if you meet Scrag, well, I guess we'll see what kind of relations there are between the Chaos Dwarves and Scrag. Kind of interesting to note that his faction, Scrag's faction, might show up in the final battle, but we'll see. Or ogres can show up in the final battle, so I'm not sure what that means when it comes to the aversion between the greenskins and between the Chaos Dwarves and the ogres. But there was also a campaign preview for Astrogoth where we saw that he could get better relations with ogres. It's always hard to say when it comes to that. Ogres typically are neutral, so they shouldn't necessarily be a problem. Alternatively, to the path in terms of going west, which I would say is the best plan, because the reason this is the best plan is the Imperial factions are weak, they're pathetic, they're easy. There's gold mines, 2 gold mines, one in Ostland, one in Sylvania. There's a lot of resources that are ripe for the taking. The alternative is to go in Cafe, which isn't a good idea for a lot of reasons. The Cafe factions will pose a far more substantial threat in your campaign than the Imperial factions. Unless Azazel just breaches the gates and just takes all of Cafe for himself, which can also happen. Because Cafe and AI can struggle, but usually speaking, Miao Ying and help aided by Xiaoming will stabilize the situation. They might lose a lot initially, but they will stabilize it. It also depends on whether or not you can, if the climate is suitable to you. But Cafe is the harder fight for all the Chaos Dwarves, I would argue, than going into the Empire, even if you have to deal with Emmerich and Ungrim. But keep in mind, Ungrim and Emmerich are not going to be as substantial in Realms of Chaos as they are in Immortal Empires. The reason is, AI benefits are stronger for Legendary Lords that are playable in a campaign. Ungrim, Emmerich, Tretch are not playable, so you probably can sweep them aside. They're more substantial than the random factions, than the minor factions. They're more substantial, but they're still not significant threats. Not as significant. The most significant threat actually is Catherine, believe it or not. I know, I've talked about all the issues Kislev has, but imagine Kislev with a significant economy, lots of recruitment slots, lots of growth. Yeah, then that becomes a problem. It was a bit surprising actually when the Champions of Chaos DLC came out and I found Catherine waiting for me with 3 damn stacks to try and take me on. I won, but damn, she put up the biggest fight of the entire campaign, and then I easily swept aside the Empire. So be concerned about Catherine. You might encounter her in every Chaos Dwarf campaign. It would be great if you let Astrogoth fight her for you. But if you have to go deal with Kislev, deal with Kislev. And after that, just sweep aside the Empire, and that's your campaign path, campaign expansion, opportunities. You might, in the preview, they showed a secondary army going to the Mountains of Morn. Let's talk a bit about the drill, because this is going to be important. We don't know if we have to actually take the settlements ourselves, if that's the only way to get those Dwarven artifacts, or if we could get them from military alliances. Hopefully we can get them from the diplomatic deal, or else it's going to be annoying as hell to deal with it. If we have to take them directly, you might have strong incentives to just fully invade the Mountains of Morn and wipe out Greases. Poor Greases, poor miserable Greases. He's terrible in Immortal Empires. He's going to be even worse right now in Immortal Empires, and he no longer has even the joy of being one of the dominant factions in Realms of Chaos when controlled by the AI. I'm not joking. Greases at the moment, in the current version of the game, can become one of the most powerful factions in the world because he has no major enemies. Well, that is going to change. That's for damn certain. Cosine here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.